You've got a random way of ordering appraisals. You have your appraiser not talking to the people that they probably shouldn't be talking specific things. That all sounds like a good thing. Then why the controversy about them?
The relationship between the appraiser and the appraisal management company is often pretty combative, and it's these sort of market forces that I think drive that kind of combat. But one of the wonderful things that being an appraiser offers you is kind of you can decide who you want to work with, and there are many that enjoy working with AMCs, and I happen to be one of them. And so what my hope is that there is a segment of the appraisal population that will rise up to this very difficult challenge and figure out innovative ways to serve that marketplace.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Warren Boizot, co-host of Face Value, a podcast from the Appraisal Institute. Our industry is always evolving, and with any new development, we will inevitably debate on how it impacts the work we do. One of those highly discussed topics is appraisal management companies. AMCs have been a part of the real estate landscape for over 50 years, but were largely limited until the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. Following the crisis, laws obligating lenders to use independent appraisers led to a sharp rise in the use and number of AMCs.
And I'm Tonia Vailas. I know, like me and Warren, many appraisers out there have a lot of questions about AMCs and how they might change the appraiser's role in the next 5 years or even the next couple months. So we are joined today by two guests who can hopefully answer our questions. Scott Dibiasio, Director of Government Affairs at the Appraisal Institute, and Mark Verrett, an SRA and ASA designated appraiser. He's CEO of Accurity Consolidated, a national appraisal firm focusing on residential mortgage appraisal. He's also the co-host of the podcast Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, covering all things real estate. Welcome, Scott and Mark, to Face Value. Now, the real question is, what gets more views, Face Value or Market Moves? I know Warren's pretty competitive, and I'm sure he'll have those stats for our listeners as soon as they're available.
Some real podcast heavy hitters here today.
It's not fair. You guys have such a great production team. It's just me. I think you guys blow me out of the water.
So, guys, how about, I know we're generally talking to appraisers out there, but let's do a little history lesson. Why do appraisal management companies exist?
I think generally speaking, they've been around far before I got into the industry in the early 2000s. But ordering appraisals is a pretty complicated process. Finding the right appraiser to do the job is an additionally complicated process. And is when huge numbers of appraisals are needed and ordered, you got to have departments running this. Most of this was handled inside the banks themselves, but there's a real need for a third party, to be an expert in placement of orders. At least there was a need seen there, as well as some separation from those with skin in the game within the bank. In those placing and receiving the appraisal assignments.
So now, Mark, I have a question for you. Your firm is an appraisal firm. I know some people might classify you as an appraisal management company. Can you tell us the difference?
Yeah. So, typically an appraisal management company gets an order for an appraisal, a bank saying, I need an appraisal assignment completed. Can you please go coordinate that process, including finding an appraiser, getting the appraisal back, often reviewing the assignment and handling some QC function, and then returning that completed assignment to the bank. Most often, the appraisal management company is contracting out to an appraiser that they don't have a direct relationship with. A 1099 relationship is most common. What has happened, kind of a phenomenon over the last several decades, is a W-2 appraiser that does work for the AMC and handles quite a bit of the appraisal assignments that come into the appraisal management company. And some portion of those that aren't done by employed staff are sent out to appraisers that are 1099. The difference in my firm, Accurity, is that we are a national appraisal firm. We take an order in, and a salaried W-2 appraiser will complete that assignment that works for us. We are not contracting that work out to a panel of appraisers across the country.
If I could just add, Warren correctly pointed to the proliferation of appraisal management companies following the financial crisis in 2008. And what happened there is there was a lot of pressure that was put on appraisers to hit certain values. And most of that pressure came from lenders directly. And there was quite a bit of overvaluation that was going on, which resulted in a lot of homeowners being underwater very quickly when the bubble burst in 2008. So AMCs marketed themselves very effectively at that time as a third-party independent buffer, if you will, between the lender and the appraiser. The appraiser is generally in an AMC relationship, not communicating directly with the lender. They're not communicating directly with, well, they are communicating directly with the AMC, but there is that buffer in between those two entities. And I think it's also important to note, and Mark alluded to this, but lenders have taken what was a significant cost center and turned it into at least a neutral line item in their operation. And in some cases, they may be making a little bit of money off of the AMC relationship. I think that's few and far between, but it's definitely something that has been taken from a cost center in the bank or financial institution into something that does not cost the institution really any significant resources. Many lenders still have appraisal coordinators or appraisal managers, but that certainly is something less than an appraisal department that they may have had in the past. And of course, AMCs are particularly attractive to small institutions who wouldn't even have the capability of having an appraisal manager and certainly not having an appraisal department. So they do play a role in the system. And, some appraisers really like working for AMCs, and there are other appraisers that, for whatever reason, don't.
So, Scott, you kind of lead me into my next question in that last statement, and that, it all sounds pretty good. You've got a random way of ordering appraisals. You have your appraiser not talking to the people that they probably shouldn't be talking specific things. That all sounds like a good thing. Then why the controversy about them?
I think it all comes back to fee compression, and lenders are collecting a certain amount from a borrower. They then are contracting with an AMC, and the amount that is being paid by the consumer generally is the same as it has been for quite some time. And of course, once the AMC is put in the middle there, they need to be compensated for their services as well. So what they do is they take a portion of the fee that is paid to them by the lender as an appraisal management service fee, if you will. And then the balance, whatever that may be, is paid to the appraiser for the appraiser's services. So in effect, it is the appraiser rather than the lender that is compensating the AMC for their services in the form of diminished compensation from what was actually paid by the consumer for the appraisal.
And what percentage of diminished compensation does the appraiser receive versus the AMC? Because I know there's been a huge discussion on this.
Yeah, I've seen a wide range, anywhere from 10% up to 50%.
There are two models that AMCs employ in paying appraisers. The first is a cost plus, where the appraiser, the AMC fee would sort of be tacked on to whatever the resulting appraiser fee is. So goes out sort of for a negotiation and a bid, the best bid wins, and then the AMC would tack on their fee on top of that. In those arrangements, the appraiser it's not who gets the profit, either the appraiser or the appraisal management company.
In addition to fee compression, AMCs generally will have tighter turnaround times than an appraiser that is directly engaged. And part of the reason for that is because the AMC then has the processes, whatever they may be, that they have to go through their quality control. So that usually, takes a couple of days. So it's basically fee compression and turnaround time that are the two biggest concerns for appraisers.
I'll add that, AMCs are difficult to work with because of the things that Scott is bringing up here. You have a lot of instances of fee compression. You have really, really difficult turn times, really difficult revision metrics, and you are essentially in the almost the larger the appraisal management company, the more this is true. They have to manage assigning out tens of thousands of assignments a day or a week, and they can only make that process efficient through automation. And so what ends up happening is that an appraiser is a number in a scorecard in a system. What have you done on your last 5, 10, 100 assignments that you've delivered? You've delivered them in 4.82 days. Well, the person that delivered them in 4.81 days is 3 people ahead of you because there are 500 people on the list, and you will never see an order because of that point. And so those are really, really difficult realities that are unforgiving and, that really frustrate and hurt appraisers on a number of levels. It is difficult to serve in that space.
Are they able to regulate quality by doing this?
And that's a point that I was just going to make. Because of the dynamics that Mark mentioned, oftentimes you will see appraisers coming from great distances into markets to perform inspections and to perform appraisals. And the local market appraisers see that, and they question whether or not those appraisers that have come from a distance are competent to appraise in those markets. And in some cases they may be, but in many cases they may not be. And you do see some degradation, in the appraisal quality because of the fact that they do have such short turnaround times, and they may be coming into a market that they're not so familiar with. And you get a lot of errors and omissions that occur because of that lack of competency. And Mark brings up a very good point, which is in many cases, appraisers don't know where they stand with AMCs. There may have been a problem with a previous appraisal that they did that caused them to be marked down a little bit, if you will. And all of a sudden they stop receiving orders and they're wondering why. So they get in contact with the AMC, and most AMCs, won't divulge that information as to what caused the appraiser to be moved down on the list that Mark references.
Now, who regulates the AMCs?
That's a very good question, which is prior to the enactment of the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, there was no regulation of appraisal management companies. And the Appraisal Institute, when I first joined in 2008, 2009 timeframe, we put together some model legislation that would have put in place, or did actually put in place, a regulatory framework at the state level for the regulation of appraisal management companies. And we were successful in getting AMC registration and licensing programs put in place in a number of states, even prior to the Dodd-Frank Act. And then Dodd-Frank actually required by federal law that, for the most part, states have to have AMC regulation in place. Now, it is a voluntary program, but there are some ramifications for a state if they don't have an AMC registration and licensing program in place.
So if I want to become an AMC, what would I have to do? I go to a bank, or I have to first register with the states to say I'm an AMC, and then I sub out all the work I receive from banks as quick to residential appraisers?
About right. I think it's, some, 6-figure yearly licensing fees and maintenance. So it's not, if you're in all 50 states, and so if you want to be a national player, there's a pretty big hurdle to get in and on an ongoing basis. And then you start building a panel of appraisers. There's a whole lot of compliance, and to meet whatever the needs of the lender are, there's usually quite a bit of audit and quality control that's necessary as well.
And I think that somebody starting a new AMC would find a tremendous amount of competition. Most lenders probably have already put in place their relationships with one or more AMCs. So if you're new to the game, you're really going to have something significant to offer to that lender in terms of, improved quality, lower prices, whatever it is, to be able to convince them to go with your AMC rather than the AMCs that they are already utilizing.
So as a residential appraiser, how do I get affiliated with the AMCs? Do I just get affiliated with one, or do I have to have a relationship with multiple AMCs?
Yeah. The way to go through this is generally an application for every AMC that is out there. And these days, kind of the term we use around my office is the ladders are pulled up. They're not saving anyone right now, and that's been the case for the last 20 months in this high interest rate cycle. There's just not a lot of mortgage applications happening, which means that there's not a lot of appraisals being ordered. So it's been a difficult place for those trying to get on to new client or AMC lists when you need it the most. And that's just the realities of a cyclical marketplace.
Yeah, Tonia, my personal strategy has always been, I don't do too much AMC work, but I'm never opposed to getting on any approved appraiser list that I can. Over the years, you get all of these applications and emails that come in and you think, nah, that's all right. I'm just going to skip this one. But you just never know as an appraiser when they have that one property that someone can't get to fast enough or isn't familiar enough with, that you end up getting one from one of these AMCs and it works out. So I always sign up for every single one that I can, even if I never do work for them.
You're an independent residential appraiser. You are on all these lists. How much of your time is spent bidding out work?
Not too much, but in 2020 through 2022, I am not exaggerating. I could have probably had a full-time assistant just bidding out work. It was that crazy. I'm not exaggerating when I say some days as close to maybe 50 to 65 bids would come through. And sometimes you just look at them and you recognize an address of an area or market that you're just not comfortable with or not as familiar with, and you just turn it down.
And I think it's also important to note that, during times of high volume, there are many situations where appraisers are able to name their fee in the cost plus model. And in many cases, those fees are pretty significant. And the AMCs obviously want to get those appraisals done as quickly as they can. So they are willing to pay significantly higher fees during times of high volume. Now, unfortunately, we're not seeing that right now. But 5 years ago, we had appraisers that were charging 3, 4, 5 times their normal fee, and AMCs were paying it very willingly.
Scott, I appreciate that point, because I think the relationship between the appraiser and the appraisal management company is often pretty combative, and it's these sort of market forces that I think drive that kind of combat. In where there are more appraisals than appraisers really use that as an opportunity to boost their margins.
Mark, I've often heard it called as payback time, and I don't like when that term is used, but yes, that is what I've heard.
You will not have to search Google very hard to see appraisers using proud phrases like "I fired that AMC" on forums and in Facebook groups. When you're a solo appraiser and entrepreneur, you have that choice, and it's great. That's one of the wonderful things that being an appraiser offers you, is kind of, you can decide who you want to work with. And it brings me to an important point that I wanted to make sure to discuss as it's related to appraisal management companies and appraisers working for them. I hope this message sort of resonates or hits the active appraisers that are doing this stuff, but also the incoming appraisers that are deciding what they want to do. And there are a couple of different paths, and I find that the Appraisal Institute, for instance, lobbies hard for appraisers to develop sort of a consulting angle or an ability to diversify their practice and have the option to get out of this sort of combative relationship. And I think it is wonderful. I know hundreds of appraisers that have successfully done this, to $1 million expert witness businesses, to $50,000 a year pre-listing businesses with agents and all sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways to do that. But there are many that enjoy working with AMCs, and I happen to be one of them. And I hope, in my mission is to help appraisers or the group of appraisers that I work with serve a particular part of the market that orders appraisals and is very demanding. It is hard for the independent appraiser to compete and offer those services. And I wonder if over time we aren't going to have enough competing and serving that marketplace that they might go elsewhere to find valuations. And so what my hope is that there is a segment of the appraisal population that will rise up to this very difficult challenge and figure out innovative ways to serve that marketplace. That's what I'm trying to do. I think sometimes it makes me a little unpopular because you're serving the big bad guys that people don't like, and I understand for good reason. But I think there's room for all of us, and I think we need to succeed in all areas of demand of appraisal services.
So, Mark, you brought us up to a great point. We have AI that stands for Appraisal Institute, and we have AI that stands for artificial intelligence. And there's those appraisal valuation models out there. So, where this is, when I started, I said, where do we see ourselves in 5 years or a few months? And I see AI as an artificial intelligence blowing up, and it's all over the place. And with Chat GPT and all this other stuff, it's really coming into the market and trying to replace the appraiser. How do you feel about that? And where do you see that taking us in the next few months or a few years?
First, I think we have a very risk intolerant user base of our services, and AI taking over. If you think about the early excitement from lawyers building cases and whatever documents they put together, sorry for being naive there, but in sort of saying, hey, this is fraught with error or inaccuracies, misquoting cases and those sorts of things. There is no room for those kind of mistakes in appraisal from banks. There's just a lot of important and large financial decisions made in this. So, I hold the opinion that AI is going to be a dominant tool. It may make much of the services that we provide unnecessary. Analyzing photos deeply maybe is one thing, but this is just a very small piece of what appraisers do. I think that artificial intelligence is going to be a tool that appraisers use and maybe allow them to do more of their work more often, or reach a conclusion much faster, or maybe more accurately in considering more data. That's sort of where I see this. And if we then bring this to appraisal management companies, largely the service they provide to lenders is that I know the right appraiser to get this assignment to. I know that because I track them really well. I've got great relationships. Well, that sort of stuff, I think, has a lot of room for automation. It's already being automated before artificial intelligence has started becoming kind of prevalent here. And so I think they will be using it as a tool, but I think it's much more disruptive in that space than it is to the appraisers completing the work.
Yeah, and I would concur with Mark that artificial intelligence really is just another tool in the appraiser's tool bag and another source of data, much like the MLS systems and tax records and such. But I don't see artificial intelligence fully replacing appraisers anytime soon. And as Mark correctly alluded to, all of the information, all of the output from AI, the appraiser needs to be very diligent in verifying. They cannot just accept it at face value, no pun intended to this podcast, but they do have to verify that information just like they would verify other information from other third-party sources.
And what about the borrowers? Where do we see the end user of the appraisal in this mix? How do they feel about working between the appraiser, the AMC, and the bank? Do you have any concern about that with the end users?
I will say that largely the borrower is confused when there is an intermediary in the process. They may have been told, but it's a complicated concept to comprehend, especially for someone that's just diving into this process, once every 15 years or whatever it is. So we find a lot of confusion that's there. We always introduce ourselves to a borrower by the phone, trying to arrange for a contact, as introducing the lender first and the AMC second, so that they recognize where we're coming from. But when there are value disputes and those sorts of things, it does create some confusion. Who do I go to and that sort of thing. And I will say that there is appraisers have generally not provided an option as for an alternative to appraisal management companies. National presence, consistent reporting, and I think national firms that have popped up over the last several years. At least I love serving AMCs. I don't intend to stop that. I'm not trying to replace them, but I am for those that want to go direct to appraisers. We're not a good option for a national company with a lender with national problems. We need to be national to solve those problems in a similar way. And so we're just trying to make appraisers competitive in the marketplace. I think there's room for that.
I could tell you that one of the public policy objectives of the Appraisal Institute over the last couple of years has been to establish that transparency for the consumer as to where every single dollar in a transaction that they're paying is going. So we have been advocating strenuously for the separation of the appraisal fee on the loan estimate documents as well as the closing documents, separation of the appraisal fee from the appraisal management fee, so that the consumer knows exactly how much of the fee that they paid is going to the appraiser and how much of it is going to the appraisal management company. We think that transparency will help to resolve some of that confusion on the part of consumers, and hopefully it will result in some consumers asking questions as to what are the services that each of these entities perform. And in many cases, the AMCs are being, in my opinion, overcompensated for the work that they do in a specific assignment.
And Scott, are you lobbying that at LDAC this year?
That is one of the things, yep. And that's primarily a regulatory issue. And we have spent a significant amount of time and resources at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau with Director Chopra, sort of introducing him and educating him on this issue. And I think we are at a point now where the agency may be ready to take action. Now, unfortunately, there probably is going to be a change in the director of the CFPB under the new administration. So we may have a period of re-education. Many of the staff will still be around so that, there will be knowledge that still exists in the agency, but at the management level, we may have some additional education that we have to provide so that they're familiar with the issue. But it is finally, I think, starting to get traction. Of course, the Dodd-Frank Act has always given the CFPB the authority to require the separation of appraisal fee from AMC fee. But heretofore, the CFPB has not taken that bait and actually gone through regulatory rulemaking process. The statute says that the CFPB may, by rule, require the separation of appraisal fee from AMC fee, but it's not anything mandatory. Of course, if we had this to do all over again, we would have advocated much more strenuously for that to be a requirement of the CFPB rather than an option.
So Warren and I have been talking about LDAC on the past couple podcasts here. And Scott, can you tell our listeners about the great news about any member or any appraiser coming to help out in this lobbying effort?
Yes, absolutely, Tonia. I appreciate that. For the first time, we are going to open the lobbying component of the LDAC program to any AI professional and, quite frankly, any appraiser that wants to come to Washington, D.C. and help us with our lobbying efforts on Capitol Hill. We are terming it as a legislative day. For the first time, there's going to be a way for the rank and file, if you will, in the Appraisal Institute and in the profession to come and make their views known to their legislators in Congress.
Super exciting, Scott. And I just want to reiterate to all of our listeners, we're asking those that aren't, you don't even need to be affiliated with the Appraisal Institute to come. So May 14th and 15th, 2025 in DC, those of you that are involved at your chapter level and maybe even involved with their state coalitions, make all those other member organizations aware of this so that they can start planning to come and meet all the other appraisers out there for a good cause.
In my experience at LDAC, there was a lot of issues that pertain to the residential appraiser. So this is a good way to have your voice heard and come out there and stand on the front line. And you'll get to talk to other appraisers, share ideas, opinions, and maybe make connections and get additional work out of this. So it's a great networking ability.
Tonia, we're big famous podcast hosts. We'll probably be sequestered somewhere privately, but if you guys have the right ticket and the right wristband, you'll be able to come back and see Tonia and I.
It's kind of interesting because the LDAC program is wildly popular amongst AI professionals, and obviously it's very competitive to be able to get into the LDAC program. And now we're expanding it out to, or at least the lobbying component out to more entities. So, and as Tonia said, it's a great networking opportunity, several social events that go along with this.
I don't get to talk about LDAC much anymore, but I spent 6 years there from 2005 to 2011. It is still to this day the single best professional thing that I've been a part of.
And sorry to divert the conversation from AMCs to LDAC to lobbying, but I think it's all connected. I think all appraisal related information, they're connected one way or other, and it's a huge organization, the Appraisal Institute, and it's a huge network of appraisers throughout the country, especially with the residential that are not affiliated with the Appraisal Institute. We really want to hear from you guys. Talk to us. Let us know what we can do better, how we can serve you.
All right. Thank you to our guests today, Scott and Mark, and thank you to our listeners. I'd love for you guys to go to Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen to our podcast or view our podcast. And Tonia, if someone out there were to have an idea for Face Value for future episodes, where would they go or what would they do?
Yes, they should go to Face Value at appraisalinstitute.org. Mark and Scott both emailed us, and that's why they're here today. Thank you guys for your request to be on this podcast and to share your experiences with us today. And we look forward to many of our listeners hopping on the podcast to talk more appraisal-related items. Thank you.